What's going on, everybody? Matt Bruning here with CampusToCanton.com. And for today's episode, I'm going to give you the top 10 quarterbacks who could shape the 2023 landscape. We're going to go over the player, the team, their schedules, who is making the playoffs, who is going to shift narratives around the landscape of college football as we jump into unprecedented times in 2024 with realignment, expanded playoffs. This will be the last year we get these four teams. So who is shaping the college 2023 football season? Before we get into that, guys, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, turn that bell icon on. You don't want to miss any of the college football content that we are providing you. And we're going to start at number 10. But before we do that, I have to give you some honorable mentions. There's three players that almost made the top 10. And in fantasy football, which we do a lot of college fantasy football. We always stick with top 12s, right? Who are the top 12 at every position? I'm going to give you 13, and just missing out at number 13 was Texas A&M quarterback Connor Wigman. Now, he had an okay time after he took over last year for the Aggies. Had one good game and then struggled in the rest. As you can see, there's just a 55.3 completion percentage, but he is a player playing for the Aggies on a team that is loaded with talent. They have talent all over the field, and really, it's Jimbo Fisher, who, no offense to Aggies fans, he's done the least with the most. It is what it is. He's got a ton of talent, though, around him on the field, and they play a lot of the top teams in the SEC. As we do have an SEC quarterback in the top 10, they could seriously change the landscape, specifically in the SEC, but it wasn't quite big enough. So I don't know if they're actually going to be able to do it to make the top 10. Number 12 was Bo Nix, Oregon quarterback. Had a phenomenal season last year. And if you look at those career stats, it is honestly kind of impressive. 68 passing touchdowns, 32 rushing touchdowns, 1,300 rushing yards, 10,000 passing yards, and 87 QBR last year, and a 62.9% completion percentage. He brought a lot back on that offense. They've got a lot of really good wide receivers, really good running game, and Marquise Bucky Irving, who a lot of people like. I love Troy Franklin at the wide receiver position. They bring in a transfer in Tess Johnson, who actually knows Bo Nix, and we've seen that worked really well for Aiden O'Connell and Charlie Chuck Sizzle Jones in Purdue last year. But they lose a key piece, and that is Kenny Dillingham, who worked with Bo Nix as a freshman in Auburn, came over last year to join that Oregon coaching staff, and it really worked out for Bo Nix. He looked incredible, but Dillingham moves on and goes to Arizona State, and they bring in an offensive coordinator that I do like in UTSA's Will Stein, but I think I've got to see it before I believe that Oregon can do it. Now, that Oregon can do it. Now, they did improve that defense a little bit, and it got a little bit better as the season went on, but we need to see them take that next step up, which it could under Dan Lanning, who I think is one of the better coaches in all of college football. We saw him was able to do it at Georgia with that defense and Kirby Smart. I think he's going to be able to do it at Oregon, but it might take him a couple I shouldn't say cycles. It should take him a couple years, but this could be that big leap forward, which is why he didn't quite make the top 10, because I think the defense is going to hold that team back. And then number 11, Georgia's Carson Beck. He's taking over for Stetson Bennett. As you can see there, not a lot. He came in mop-up duty when they were blowing teams out, but he was a high-rated 4-star coming out in his cycle. He actually had Brock Vandagriff come in with him, who is a 5-star and has kind of overshadowed him. Carson Beck is a very good quarterback, and while I think he could affect the landscape, I personally think Georgia's offense is going to change a little bit and be a little bit more run-heavy and continue to rely on an incredible defense with an incredibly good head coach in Kirby Smart. They bring in Bobo to run the offense now as they lose Todd Monken to the NFL. We'll see if anything changes. I have a feeling we're not going to see quite that aggressive and fun passing attack we've seen the past 2 years with Stetson Bennett, who was a little bit of a gunslinger, and they had to rein him in at times. Carson Beck doesn't seem to have that gunslinger trait in him. Seems to be just a very good quarterback. So I don't know that they'll be as explosive, so I didn't want to put him up there in the top 10, but let's get to number 10. And that is one Tennessee's Joe Milton. So, look, I get it. He has not played much. And realistically, outside of the bowl game against Clemson last year, the times that we saw Joe Milton on the field, it was not pretty. There was a game, in his first game with Tennessee, he runs out of bounds, time running out. Just throw the ball in the end zone. If it's picked off or it's batted down, whatever. You don't run out of bounds with time running out. Hendon Hooker ends up getting that job. plays out the season, has a great season last year. Joe Milton, though, has all the tools in the world to be an incredible college quarterback. We know in this Josh Heupel offense, it is schemed to make it easier for the quarterback. So there's been a lot of talk about Joe Milton, even from that bowl game till this year, that he was taking that step forward. He was showing them everything that they wanted to see. I think he can do it. The real question is going to be, is can he be consistent? You see down there the 57.8 completion percentage. It's not great. And they do have a fairly tough schedule this year. They start off fairly easy with Austin P. They've got their Virginia Cavaliers, UTSA, South Carolina before going into a bye week. And then they do get the Florida Gators as well. Florida definitely, I think, has taken a little bit of a step back without Anthony Richardson. But then they hit a 3-game stretch. It's going to be difficult. They do get Texas A&M at home and Alabama at home, which could be, they go to Alabama. And then they get Kentucky as well. That is going to be tough. And then they have Georgia toward the end of the season. If Tennessee can beat all but one of those, I do think that there has a realistic shot of making the playoffs, especially if it's Georgia that they lose to. Alabama, in my opinion, in a little bit of a downturn right now. Don't know what they're doing at quarterback. That defense, I don't think is going to be much better than it was last year. Tennessee beat Alabama last year, granted with Hendon Hooker, but Joe Milton does have the skill set to do it. Tennessee and Joe Milton could be one of those teams that really shapes the college football landscape. Had they not lost to South Carolina, I think, and honestly, hadn't they not lost Hendon Hooker's probably at the Heisman ceremony, and there's a chance they're beating Ohio State out for that 4th spot in the playoffs. So it is going to be very intriguing to see what happens with Tennessee, and I do think they can do it again this year if Joe Milton is what Josh Heupel is billing him up to be. If he's not, they have a phenomenal 5-star in Nico waiting. That he's not going to take him to the playoffs this year, but he's a very intriguing player that should work in that system very well. Always good with the run game. Squirrel White should dominate at wide receiver this year. It's going to be a really fun offense, but it's going to hinge on Joe Milton, which is why he comes in at number 10. At number 9, Campus to Canton, Felix Sharp co-founder's favorite, Michael Penix Jr., Washington quarterback. Spent a couple years in Indiana. In fact, that's how he got to know one Kalen DeBoer, who came over as head coach and brought him in as a transfer. Now, look, he's had a lot of injuries, multiple shoulder injuries, multiple ACLs, but we don't care about the NFL future. We're talking about just the college football landscape here. And if you look at those career stats, they are impressive. 8,000 passing yards, 60 passing touchdowns, 10 rushing touchdowns, 23 interceptions, 62 completion percentage, and a career 74.7 QBR. Washington has, honestly, an easy schedule, in my opinion. They start out the year with Boise State, Tulsa, Michigan State, who is definitely in a downturn, though they do have to travel to East Lansing, Cal, and Arizona before getting a bye week, and then coming back and hitting the meat of their schedule. They do get the Oregon Ducks right off the bat, and that is going to be a massive game for them and the Oregon Ducks and one quarterback, Bo Nix. The winner of that, I think, puts themselves in the driver's seat to compete with USC to win the Pac-12. It is a very good Pac-12. While some of the teams at the bottom of the conference are not that good, the top are all very close, and USC, Washington, and Oregon. That's why it's very hard to cap who's going to win that conference. I think all three of those guys could honestly knock each other out by beating each other in a little bit of a round-robin way. But if Washington is able to beat Oregon, they do get Arizona State next, which should be a win for them. Stanford, then they get the big one at USC in LA Memorial Coliseum, going to be a massive game. Then they get Utah, the last a big one on their schedule before Oregon State and Washington State. Now, Oregon State, I think, is a very sneaky team this year. But if Washington has made it through that schedule, maybe that's where they slip up, but I doubt it. I think Washington has a realistic shot of winning the Pac-12 and possibly going to a Pac-12 championship and maybe even a playoff berth. But they have to win the games like Oregon, USC, and Utah. And unfortunately, fortunate for them, actually, USC is the only away game out of those big ones. They get Oregon at home. They get Utah at home. The USC game is going to be crucial for Washington in shaping the college football landscape. And Michael Penix maybe working in some draft capital, maybe making it to the Heisman ceremony. We'll see. but they return almost all of their offense, a good offensive line. They were able to bring back Jalen McMillan and Rome Odunze, who are now both getting high-end drafts. I mean, there are people talking about Rome Odunze being a first-round pick next year. They have a loaded offense. Kalen DeBoer, I think, is an underrated offensive mastermind on the college football level. If he's able to get Michael Penix going and they are able to master this schedule, Michael Penix is going to take the Washington Huskies into the playoffs for the first time since I believe it was year 2 of this 14 playoffs. So it's been a while. The Pac-12 has not had anybody in since then. This is their chance. This is their year to get one of those teams in. Will it be Michael Penix? That is going to be a fun story to watch. At number 8, Jordan Travis, Florida State Seminoles. They have honestly been a kind of a sleeper. I don't even know if I should say sleeper. They've been a popular pick to make the playoffs this year, and he had a massive step forward last year. Not a player that I think many people were expecting to ever really get draft capital talks, but he was doing it last year, and he played very well up until the injury and even came back and played well. A little bit of a rushing, I shouldn't even say a little bit, a rushing threat. Look at that, 1,700 rushing yards, almost 6,000 passing yards, 46 passing touchdowns, 18 interceptions. That's a pretty decent touchdown to interception ratio. 73.4 QBR for his career. And Florida State has a tough schedule. They will be massive players in this. They get LSU at Camping World Stadium, going to be a massive game. It was the big game in week 1 last year where LSU lost on a missed field goal, and it looked like Florida State was set up for massive success. Then they get Southern Miss and Boston College, 2 games that they should win before the big showdown against Clemson. That will be the big one. They have to travel to Clemson for that game. But then after that, if I'm being honest with you guys, I think the schedule softens up. So if they're able to beat Clemson, they get that bye week. Virginia Tech, Syracuse, Duke Blue Devils, Wake Forest, Pitt, and then the big game against Miami. And I don't know what that is going to be. Miami is a very intriguing team to me. They could go one way or they could be just as bad as they were last year. Regardless, it's going to be an interesting game before they get North Alabama for a big game against the Florida Gators in Gainesville. Massive, massive game for Florida State on that one. But they are major players here. LSU is going to be likely a very good team this year. They brought back a lot. Second year in Brian Kelly's team here, who outperformed, in my opinion, what they were last year. I did not expect Brian Kelly to be able to come in and turn them into a team that was going to play for the SEC championship, yet he did it. Now they're in year 2. So can Florida State get that win? I think that they can, and that's going to be a massive notch on their belt if they're able to get that one in week 1. LSU, if this was later in the season, I think I would favor LSU, but week 1, that's when things get weird, and Florida State has a chance to capitalize on that, and then their next big game will be Clemson right before the bye week. Speaking of Clemson, Cade Klubnik comes in at number 7. He's taken over for this offense. We saw him last year. He was good, not great. Let's just be honest, Clemson fans. He was better than what you were getting at a DJ, but there was still some growing that needed to come, and that's understandable. He was a freshman quarterback thrown out there. He looked okay in the bowl game, not great, was making some plays, but just really didn't have that like winning moment. And Clemson has, honestly, in my opinion, a fairly easy schedule. They start out with Duke, the Charleston South, Florida Atlantic, my goodness. Then they get Florida State at home. Again, that's the big one, if they're able to get that game. You get Syracuse and then Wake Forest before a bye week. Then you go to Hard Rock Stadium to play Miami. Again, we don't know what Miami's going to be, so it's hard to cap on that game. Notre Dame after NC State, Georgia Tech, but then the big 2 games in a row. The Carolinas, they get North Carolina at home before they have to go travel to South Carolina. That is going to be 2 massive games. I mean, look, let's be honest. Clemson was in it last year. They won the ACC championship, right? They beat North Carolina, but they weren't making the playoffs. And that is realistically what Clemson fans want. They want to be in the playoffs. They may not win the national championship, but they are expecting you to be in the playoffs. And that is why Cade Klubnik is up here. He is going to be the reason they do or don't make it, because Clemson had a decent defense last year, and it wasn't able to keep them from losing multiple games. It was because of the quarterback position. Can Cade Klubnik take that step forward and raise the Clemson Tigers offense? Dabo went out of the norm and brought in TCU's offensive coordinator last year, Garrett Riley, who was able to take TCU to the national championship. He is an intriguing offensive coordinator. Yes, he is related to Lincoln Riley, but let's not say that they are the same. Garrett Riley, though a couple years, has shown to be very good. I don't want to put him in Lincoln Riley's category just yet. Phenomenal offensive coach. He's getting a very good team. I mean, Will Shipley and Phil Maffa, dangerous duo in the backfield. Got Antonio Williams. Can Adam Randall come back healthy? You got Bo Collins over there on the outside too. They've got some intriguing weapons around this offense. The offensive line hopefully improved from what it has been last year. Can Garrett Riley get the best out of Cade Klubnik? Most of us at Campus to Canton in the college fantasy space believe, yeah, he can. We saw what he was able to do with Max Duggan last year. And I don't think it's unfair to say Cade Klubnik is definitely a couple steps forward from Max Duggan. But if he can't, it's going to be probably pretty bad for the Clemson Tigers. But that is why he is so far up here. He's at number 7 on this list because they have a realistic shot of winning the ACC and getting back to the playoffs. They control their destiny in the ACC. They play all the big name players. And if they're able to win all those games or even lose one, because we've seen, you lose one, you get your championship game. Even if you don't get to your championship game, looking at you, Alabama, Ohio State, you can still get into the playoffs. I think Clemson has that shot, but I'm a little nervous about it, which is why they come down here at 7. The next 3 in a row, we got Big Ten players, and it's going to be really intriguing to see how these 3 play out. Number 6 for me is one Drew Allar. Now, he is being ushered into, I could say, a golden era for the Penn State Nittany Lions. We saw him in limited amounts last year. James Franklin just did not want to give up on the Sean Clifford experience, and maybe he was right. Sean Clifford gets drafted in, I believe it was the 5th round to the Green Bay Packers, and maybe he knew more about Sean Clifford than the rest of us did. But Drew Allar has all the talent in the world. 24/7 Sports comps him to Josh Allen. I don't think that he's quite that, but he is a truly phenomenal player. He's been working with the QB coach recently to work on his release and his footwork. He's got it all, guys. This dude can throw with anticipation. He can challenge tight windows. He knows how to throw with touch. Like, he is going to be special. And there was a play last year, granted, I know, against a Miami, Ohio team that you're not expecting to be like a massive powerhouse, but it was still a throw that was an NFL throw on the move to the back of the end zone to where only his wide receiver could get it up high. It was a beautiful throw on a rope, by the way, too, ladies and gentlemen. And that's what Drew Allar brings to this offense. And they have an interesting schedule. It starts off fairly easy, in my opinion. You get West Virginia, Delaware, Illinois. Iowa could be interesting. Obviously, usually a fairly good defense. I don't think the offense is going to challenge this Penn State defense much because I do think Penn State is going to continue to have a very good defense. And then they get Northwestern before they get the bye week. Then in the second half is when things get interesting for them. UMass, easy, but then they have to travel to Columbus to play at the Horseshoe against Ohio State, Indiana, Maryland, and then they get Michigan at home, which was a good game last year, before finishing out with Rutgers and Michigan State. They've got to beat one of or both of Ohio State and Michigan. If they beat one of them, and we're going to talk about the other 2 teams here in a minute, I think that Penn State does have a chance to be that one loss, maybe miss your conference championship game, but make the playoffs team because that defense is going to be good. They're likely going to be highly rated if they're able to go through and beat one of those. I mean, right now, Ohio State's ranked at 5, Michigan at 2. We're going to go over both their schedules again here in a minute. I don't think that's changing before they get to Penn State. So if Penn State beats Ohio State or Michigan, that's a top 5 team on your resume that I think Penn State is going to be able to put notch in your belt, right? And you have a chance to make the playoffs. And a lot of that, I think, is because of just where, if I'm being honest, the college football landscape is in a downturn right now. You got Georgia and then everybody else. And I mean everybody else. Where usually you had Alabama up there. I think Ohio State's been like right below Alabama at times. Well, Michigan's jumped Ohio State. They've beaten them 2 years in a row. So there's a lot of interesting moving parts right now in the college football landscape. And I think Penn State has a chance to be at Dante Cephas, Caden Saunders, if he can kind of bounce back from a poor freshman season. They might have arguably the best running back duo, not just in the Big Ten, but in the nation, in Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen. They have always had a good offensive line. And Drew Allar brings them something they have never had, which is a quarterback prospect with true NFL upside. I mean, he has true first-round NFL upside. If Mike Yurcich is allowed to open up this passing game, I think Penn State's going to be very dangerous. I think there is a shot that they're the best offense in the Big Ten, which brings me to the team that has won the Big Ten the past 2 years, and that is number 5's Michigan quarterback, J.J. McCarthy. Look, he's been good. He really has. He's had his moments. I still question what he's going to be going to the NFL, and it really is weird because Michigan won't allow him to completely open it up. But much like last year, they have a schedule that they should be able to walk through. And they had some tough moments last year against teams that they shouldn't have. But before their bye week, they go East Carolina, UNLV, Bowling Green, Rutgers, Nebraska, Minnesota, Indiana, Michigan State. Tell me the game that scares you there. There shouldn't be any of them. Before we get to the rest of the games, J.J. McCarthy, 3,000 passing yards, 27 passing touchdowns, 7 rushing touchdowns, 7 interceptions, a 79 QBR. That's for the past 2 years that he's been a starter. He has been good. He plays really well out of structure, and I want to see Michigan open it up a little bit more. We just talked about how great the Penn State running back duo is. They have Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards in their backfield, and despite what you may think of Blake Corum's possible NFL future, they're also a very good dynamic duo. There's 3 of them in the Big Ten. We'll talk about one more here in a minute. All of them, though, I think are going to be really good. Michigan, the reason I don't have him as high in playing a big key factor is because of that schedule early on. Then they get Purdue, then Penn State, again, traveling to Penn State before finishing out with Maryland, and then Ohio State at home, who they beat pretty handedly at home last time they played 2 years ago. Michigan is, in my opinion, considered the front runners in the Big Ten, which is why he'll be here. I'll just spoil it for you. Kyle McCord is number 4, and I'll explain why. Even though Michigan has been the better team, why Kyle McCord is that for you. You may think maybe some homerism. It's not. I actually have some pretty big fears about Ohio State moving forward, but we're going to talk about them in a minute. J.J. McCarthy has run this offense competently and done exactly what Jim Harbaugh wants him to do, and if he does that again, I think there's a likely chance that they could get in, or they should get into the playoffs if they handled their schedule. But Penn State almost had them last year. I think Drew Allar could change it. I don't know. I really like Drew Allar, and I really like that Penn State offense. But again, if Penn State beats Michigan, but Michigan beats Ohio State, and Ohio State beats Penn State, we might be stuck in that little round robin I was just talking about with the Pac-12. It's going to be interesting to see what happens regardless. Michigan brought back a decent amount of their team. They're going to be a really good team. But the reason I put Kyle McCord at number 4 here is because of the Ohio State offense. They have a fairly easy schedule moving forward, but they're likely going to be ranked ahead of Michigan most of the season once they get to week 4, if they're able to beat Notre Dame in Notre Dame. Indiana, Youngstown, Western Kentucky, then they get Notre Dame before bye week, before they get Maryland, Purdue, Penn State at home, Wisconsin in Wisconsin, Rutgers, Michigan State, Minnesota, and then at Michigan in the Big House. That's why I think Ohio State should be ranked just a tad bit about being a landscape changer in 2023. If Kyle McCord can do what C.J. Stroud wasn't able to do and beat Michigan, then Ohio State's going to be in the playoffs because of their schedule alone. If they beat Notre Dame, if they beat Wisconsin, who's currently ranked at number 25, and if they're able to beat number 8 Penn State, I think they'll have a chance to make it in the playoffs, even if they then for the 3rd year in a row lose to Michigan. But Kyle McCord comes in at 4 because we haven't seen a lot from him. He had 1 start in Akron, and then he's come up in mop-up duty, much like a couple of the other quarterbacks we've already talked about on this list. But he has the offense. I don't think it's unfair to say he has the best offense in the Big Ten currently. Now, incredible running back duo in Travion Henderson and Maye Williams. Incredible wide receiver core, and what many consider the best wide receiver in college football, Marvin Harrison Jr., and the second best in Emeka Egbuka, Julian Fleming, Jaden Ballard. They have a deep wide receiver core, and Jeremy Ruckert comes back. They have a very good core. The offensive line has some questions. They brought in some players through the transfer portal. Maybe it'll lock it up a little bit, but they will not have the offensive line they had last year. It's going to come down to Kyle McCord to make this happen, though. It just is. That defense for Ohio State was not good at times last year. And it takes about a year before those Jim Knowles defenses really kick in. Well, that'll be this year. This is a test. This is a massive year for Ohio State, Ryan Day, and everybody. They lose to Michigan for a third year in a row. I think there will be a lot of people calling for Ryan Day's head, and all that is going to fall on Kyle McCord's shoulders, which is why he is number 4 on the list. I think there's a lot more for him to prove and a lot more for Ohio State to prove than even a Michigan, which might be crazy to say because if you were to ask most people, I think they would tell you they think Ohio State's the better team, but Michigan has done it. It doesn't matter what people predict Ohio State to do. Michigan has beaten them 2 years in a row as the considered lesser team. Ohio State's got to go out there and prove it now. So if Kyle McCord and Ohio State are able to do that, that is why he's number 4 for me. And if they are able to do that, they will be in the playoffs. Number 3, Texas quarterback Quinn Ewers. He had a poor season last year. But against the Alabama game, I know it's a but. Against the Alabama game, he looked good for those 3 drives before getting injured. And if I'm being honest, he didn't look horrible in the Oklahoma game either. That shoulder injury looked like it held him back a little bit. He ended up having a finger injury as well later in the year. Just couldn't put it all together. It looked really bad. I mean, just look at the stats there. 58% completion percentage, 6 interceptions to just 15 touchdowns, negative 52 yards rushing, only 2,000 yards passing. 2,000 yards passing, guys, in a Steve Sarkisian offense, who's one of the better offensive guys in the college football landscape. I mean, guys, he went to the Atlanta Falcons as an offensive coordinator and led Matt Ryan to one of his better years as well. Like, Steve Sarkisian is incredibly, if you just watch Texas plays, whether you're a fan of Texas or not, if you just watch the way he schemes up plays, you might look at that offense and be like, dude, Steve Sarkisian's kind of a genius. And he really is. So it is a letdown, and it is a little bit, disappointing that Quinn Ewers was only able to do what he did. They've got a really good schedule. Start out with Rice, whatever. At home, great. But then they go to Alabama. That's the landscape changer right there. Last year, they beat Alabama if Quinn Ewers stays healthy. I have no doubt about that. They should have, honestly, they beat him if Hudson Card stays healthy. He injured his ankle in the third quarter and wasn't able to run. They likely beat Alabama, and then who knows? They were not going to make the playoffs. They lost multiple games last year, but Alabama's still not quite the team that they have been. And you'll notice, and I'm gonna spoil it for you now, there's no Alabama quarterback on this list. They don't know who their quarterback's going to be. Even if it is Jalen Milroe, I don't know that he's a college football landscape changer. And I don't know they can rely on that defense to be a landscape changer. So Texas is able to beat Alabama. They have everything ahead of them at that point. Wyoming, Baylor, Kansas before Oklahoma in the Cotton Bowl. Massive game. They're not going to have the advantage they had last year, hopefully, likely, with Dylan Gabriel out. Because if Dylan Gabriel's out, Oklahoma has a very good true freshman in Jackson Arnold who will be able to step up, and they're not just having to run a wildcat offense, which is what they had to run. I was at that game. It was wild. They were literally having a running back play quarterbacks. Fairly easy for the defense to kind of key off on them. Quinn Ewers had some impressive moments, but overall an okay game in that one. They're able to beat Oklahoma. They go into a bye week before getting Houston, BYU, Kansas State, TCU, Iowa State, and then Texas Tech. This schedule, while interesting, especially adding some of the new additions to the Big 12 in Houston and BYU to them, TCU, a little bit of a downturn now after losing Max Duggan and a lot of other players to the NFL. Kansas State, can they do it again? Maybe, but they're coming to Austin. So that's going to be a good game. Iowa State, tough game. Regardless, they do have to go up to Jack Trice Stadium to get that done in Ames, Iowa. But they do get Texas Tech at home, final game of the season. Texas has everything riding on Quinn Ewers and Steve Sarkisian. This is it. This is their last chance to bring home a title before heading to the SEC. And I think Quinn Ewers is going to be able to do that. He is a phenomenal prospect. He throws to some good anticipation, good touch. Footwork was crap last year, but all reports are that he's been working on that and improved it. And if Texas is able to get through that schedule, even with just the one loss, they don't even have to go unscathed, one loss, we're going to see Texas in the playoffs. They're just too big a name. We've seen that this college football committee cares more about the big name at times than it does anything else. The resumes, they'll change the narrative around the resume however they want to make it look like they did what they wanted. Texas will be in if they lose one game, and Quinn Ewers will be a massive part of that. Number 2, Drake Maye. North Carolina quarterback. Great year last year, at least for the first part. Kind of tailed off toward the end, but that's okay. Look at those stats. In 1 year starting with arguably one of the worst offensive lines in all of college football, 39 passing touchdowns, 7 rushing touchdowns. He outrushed one Caleb Williams with 760 rushing yards, 7 interceptions, 66% completion percentage, and an 82.7 QBR. He had a phenomenal season last year. He's going to be the starter. Now, definitely some questions. Chip Lindsey, new offensive coordinator. What's that going to look like? He loses his main target in Josh Downs, but they bring over one Devontae Walker, 6'3", 195, but tracked at 23 miles per hour. Not just a big contested catch threat, my friends. He is also a speed threat. Devontae Walker could help change this offense and give him a player that he can rely on. And I still got Nate McCollum, Brian Nesbitt at tight end, who can be moved all around the formation, really good as well. They have Gavin Blackwell. It's going to be a good receiving core, but losing Josh Downs is huge. But I think Devontae Walker is going to be able to make up for that. The offensive line's likely going to be an issue. They've got 4 interesting running backs, all of which can help Drake Maye make plays. And when it comes down to the schedule, I think it's actually pretty good for them. Now, they start week 1, the ABC night game at South Carolina. I'm sorry, at home, get South Carolina at Bank of America Stadium. Whoo, boy, that's going to be a great game. Spencer Rattler, Beamer coming in to try and knock off Mac Brown and Drake Maye. If they win that, I think they've got a pretty easy run for a little bit. Appalachian State, Minnesota, Pitt, before they get an off week. Syracuse, Miami. We've talked a little bit about Miami already. Don't know exactly what they'll be, but I think they can win that. Virginia, Georgia Tech, the Campbell Camels, who I honestly don't even know who that is. I love the logo, though, with the big C and the camel on there. Duke, then Clemson. That's the big one. Going to Clemson before finishing out at NC State. 2 tough road games to end the season, but Clemson's the main one. There's a realistic shot that North Carolina is undefeated heading into that Clemson game, and that could be it right there. If both teams are undefeated, you're likely seeing a Clemson-North Carolina matchup again in the ACC championship, and whoever loses that game has a chance to exact revenge. And if they do, they're likely going into the college football playoff. Drake Maye has everything in front of him this year. We know he's already considered a high-end draft pick, but can he do it in a Chip Lindsey offense within, changing offensive pieces and somewhat of a downturn last year? If it wasn't the change at offensive coordinator, I'd be much higher on this. But that worries me. Second year in an offensive system I like a lot better than now second year starting, but new offensive system. Regardless, Drake Maye has everything ahead of him. He's number 2 to change the college football landscape. And number 1, you guys guessed it, it's Caleb Williams. Paired with Lincoln Riley, who is the best offensive play caller in all of college football. Started 2 years. It says the started 2 years. Started 1 year, but played a lot in his freshman season when he was put in for Spencer Rattler. 6,449 passing yards, 63 passing touchdowns is ridiculous. 16 rushing touchdowns, 824 rushing yards, 9 interceptions, 66% completion percentage, and 86.5 QBR, his career stats. All of these stats were the career stats of every player I should have mentioned. I mean, what else is there to say? He's the perceived number 1 overall pick for the 2024 NFL draft for a good reason. He is an incredible player. He can do it all. Now, personally, I think he plays a little too loose and a little too much out of structure. He bails out of clean pockets, but it works for him. They have a very good receiving core. While Mario Williams, who followed him over from Oklahoma, hasn't really had that breakout, you have him, who's been in the system now going into his 3rd year. Brendan Rice. They bring over, my goodness, his name just jumped out of my head, Dorian Singer. They bring over Dorian Singer. 2 phenomenal freshmen, Zachariah Branch and Mekhi Lemon. This team is going to be very good offensively. That's never the question, right? It's been their defense. Well, again, much like some of these other teams, a very good schedule for them. San Jose State, Nevada, Stanford, before heading into a bye week, before they go to Arizona State, to Colorado, which won't be an intriguing football game, but it'll be fun to watch regardless because of Dion. But USC should win that pretty easily. Then they get Arizona at home before traveling to Notre Dame and then getting Utah at home in back-to-back weeks. That's going to be the tough part of their schedule right there, going to Notre Dame, coming back home to Utah. Utah had their number last year. They've had Notre Dame's number, but Notre Dame a much better passing attack, and their defense has improved as well. Will that a USC defense be able to slow down Sam Hartman and the Notre Dame offense will be the key. If they win that, then getting Utah at home, massive game there. Can Utah do it again and upset them? If they do, then they have to hope Utah's lost somewhere down the road and they can finish out a very tough schedule, which is at Cal, then Washington at home before traveling to Oregon in Autzen Stadium before then getting UCLA at home. That is why they are number one and why Caleb is number one in the college football landscape changer. USC has not been in the college football playoffs. And I think it would be a absolute travesty if one of the better quarterbacks we've seen over the past couple years in Caleb Williams never has a chance to get to the playoffs and show us what he can do against a Georgia or an Ohio State or a Michigan or a Clemson, whoever it is that makes it to those Final Four. And I think there's a chance that he might not be able to because that back end schedule is tough. In the last 6 games to get Notre Dame, Utah, Washington, Oregon, and UCLA all in consecutive weeks. And then you get one break in between there in the California Golden Bears. It's going to be a tough schedule for them. And it's all going to be because of that defense, not the offense. Can USC's defense slow them down? And if they can't, they're going to rely heavily on this man right here, number 13, Caleb Williams, to try and keep them in every game. It's going to be fun. Those, ladies and gentlemen, are my top 10 college football quarterbacks who will change the landscape in the 2023 season. Tell me what I got wrong. Was I wrong to put Kyle McCord above J.J. McCarthy? Should I have put somebody else in there? Should I put Riley Leonard? Who else? You guys tell me who I should. Tyler Van Dyke of Miami. Maybe Miami upsets all those teams. Who knows? You guys tell me who I got wrong, who should have been in this list. And if you tell me who should have been in the list, you better tell me who I should have pulled out of that top 10. Thank you guys so much. And we'll be back again soon with the top 10 running backs who could change the college football landscape. Make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and we will talk to you guys again soon.